It's an Archaeodeath monthly review with Professor Howard Williams.
Hello Archaeodeathlings, and welcome to my November monthly roundup of all things Archaeodeath. And my word, November has been a busy month with lots of teaching going on my MA Archaeology of Death and Memory, also my the third year module I teach on Vikings, and another third year module I'm working on the archaeology on archaeology and contemporary society, a second year or level 5 module on empire and aftermath. We've explored Roman archaeology and we're heading into the early Middle Ages, so I'm having great fun with the teaching, but wow, it's a lot of work recording online, doing async pre-record live sessions, and then delivering via Microsoft Teams to the group. So it's been really hard work, but that's been a really busy part of what I've been up to. And in addition to that, I found time to keep up with my usual 15 Archaeodeath blogs and some YouTube videos too. So I want to take you through those and then add some reflections at the end. Start off, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, Archaeodeath, Howard Williams. In the last month, since my last monthly review, I posted the second half of my public talk on What's Dyke, which I've just delivered, but they were the pre-record talks I then delivered to the Holts Local History Society about Britain's third longest monument, What's Dyke. I did a presentation about the archaeology and the Walking Dead, which is an ongoing interest of mine on my blog, about how the TV show represents various post-apocalyptic material worlds and how we can approach them as archaeologists. And I then conducted my second Archaeodeath interview with Pauline Clark, a doctoral researcher at the University of Chester. And I then did a book review of my 2007 co-edited collection with Professor Sarah Semple on early medieval mortuary practices. That's a special issue of the journal Anglo-Saxon Studies and Archaeology and History. So those are the videos, the weekly videos I've done. I've got a couple more here still to come out. One on Yale and Offa, reflecting on statues, naming practices, and so on. That's and heritage in the Welsh Marches. That's a presentation I gave to the Historic Towns and Villages Forum last month, and I'm going to put that online soon enough. And Archaeology and the Walking Dead too. So keep tuned for more Archaeodeath YouTube videos. In addition to that, I've been busy writing on my Archaeodeath blog and exploring fact and fiction in mortuary archaeology, past and present. So I started off November looking at Fear the Walking Dead Season 3 and a dream cemetery represented. I then did a post about a book project that's ongoing that I'm doing distinctively with Femke Lippok of Leiden University. We're interviewing people rather than asking them to write book chapters, and our third interview for the book Cremation in the Early Middle Ages was with Dr. Raymond Mazant, and so that was a really exciting interview about cremation practices in southwest Germany. I then looked at cremation in our contemporary world in a blog post about Margan Abbey's Garden of Remembrance, and then I looked at two blog posts to coincide with Remembrance Day, with the 11th of November, on war commemoration, looking at statuary. And the first one I looked at the Count of Valhalla at Cannock Chase, this grim fallen warrior memorial at the German War Cemetery on Cannock Chase, before flipping it over to looking at the British perspective and looking at the figural corpse at the National Memorial Arboretum's Armed Services Memorial, the sort of a National Memorial Arboretum in Alresford, Staffordshire, the Armed Forces Memorial. Sorry, the National Memorial Arboretum at Alresford is our sort of national focus of commemoration. So I looked at the story and the character of the representation of the corpse within that memorial environment. So jumping from the contemporary world, past worlds, fictional worlds, I then went back and looked at Fear the Walking Dead Season 4 and the morality of burial, before looking at the heritage context in which memorialisation takes place, looking at Mount Grace Priory, a very beautiful modern ruin in the charge of English heritage, must be visited when you can, at the Carthusian house of the late 14th to 16th century. And I look look at the way in which memorialisation is part of this landscape, as well as a space of ruined dwelling of the monks. One also gets to see memorial benches and also sculpture. So there's sculpture linked to the the sort of commemoration of the church, and it also has memorial chapels as part of it. So they are talking about the memorial benches, and they're the Jesus and baby Christ child and Mary sculpture by the high altar, as well as the lapidarium. Staying with heritage, I then look at the new redisplay in Reading Museum, showing in comic form the story of Henry I's burial and its translation to Reading Abbey. And so I thought it was a really fabulous little sort of comic portrayal of his treatment, his heart and intestines being removed, and the corpse started to smell. So they and all the story of how his body was treated. And I think that's a really wonderful way of not simply sort of for all ages conveying it in a simple visual manner, but also conveying something of the process of burial that's often missing from funerary representations and narratives in museum context. I then touch on the very controversial subject of colonialism, historic slavery and the National Trust, and I take an Archaeodeath stance on this issue, and I make the point that the recent publication that's caused great controversy and Tory MPs making comments in the House of Commons about the politicisation of the National Trust is a really important initiative, but I also say in some ways it doesn't go far enough, and we need to explore beyond listing some of the interconnections, the web of colonialism in our historic landscape, including church memorials. I then look at some other fabulous church memorials. I do a detailed Archaeodeath exploration of the Mansell tombs at Margan Abbey Church, which are late 16th, early 17th century tombs, 4 in number as chest tombs with effigies, and then the rest are around the walls. And I talk about how the sort of citational relationship between these tombs is key to understanding them, how they relate to each other, they crew a story. And I think they were actually made within a short order of each other to contrive a genealogy down at least 3 or possibly 4 generations. A fantastic example of early modern sort of retrospective and prospective interplays in memorialisation, focusing on effigies. I then jump back to Fear the Walking Dead season 4 and talk about a cache that becomes a grave. I then mourn the passing, or I think the passing, of a liquidated tour of Dublin, the Viking Splash Tours, which I never got to go on. That's one of their vehicles, Freya, and where you can wear a horned helmet and you can go in the Liffey and you can have a good time. But apparently, because of the coronavirus, liquidation faces that modern fun heritage tour. And I talk about that. It's silly. It seems silly, but it's actually important to remember. So much is talked about the racist and far right and exploitation of the early Middle Ages, and that's true. But the early Middle Ages can be fun for people too. And let's remember that play and enjoyment and a laugh shouldn't be sort of ripped out in our public academic engagements and in thinking about how we engage with the early medieval past. I then talk about pathways of the dead, and this is another phenomenon I've looked at elsewhere before, about how pathways within churches are lined and framed by dislocated gravestones, almost mortuary lapidaria. And I've talked about this before on my blog, but I give an example of the Church of Llanossa in Flintshire, and the interaction between these dislocated graves and the cremation plots, how the old parts of the graveyard, when the gravestones have been removed or shifted, can then be reused for relatively shallow interments of cremains. I then realised, a bit of a shock actually, that 12 months ago I did a public lecture that was recorded for the BBC History Extra Weekend Festival at Chester. And they, as part of the lockdown, on their podcast, the History Extra podcast, they released my video. Which is wonderful, but of course I was going, oh my gosh, I haven't touched this topic for quite a while. I better have a look back, listen back and see what I said about Viking warrior women 12 months ago. And I stand by every word, but it's interesting to see how I pitched it to a public audience. It's a bit shouty but have a listen for yourselves. There's still ongoing controversies about this topic. And then finally, and I'm very proud of this, I I announced the preliminary lineup of DigiDeath, Public Archaeologies of Mortality. This is going to be the 6th University of Chester Archaeology Student Conference, where my third year single honour students get to help me and participate and deliver at a public conference. And this year we were going to go online anyway, but the pandemic makes that essential. And this provisional list of speakers, because I've not only got my students speaking, 4 live expert keynotes from Dr. Lindsay Buster, Dr. Hayley Mickleborough, Aoife Sutton and Professor Tim Thompson, and there's my students with their preliminary topic areas. Not only that, we've got Dr. Karina Croucher, who's going to be our discussant, but then I've basically bolted on a whole other, that's going to be the live event. I'm going to have an after live event. After live, get it? Which looks at, and I've basically invited anyone who will be willing to come and give Twitter presentations and pre-recorded video presentations on the interactions of digital archaeology, public archaeology and mortuary archaeology. In other words, digital public mortuary archaeology, how we deal with death and mortality, stories about death in the past through the digital arena. So we have a look at the range of talks we have being proposed delivered by Twitter presentations and vlogs, in other words pre-recorded videos. So we got probably a day and a half of material, and I'm absolutely delighted. I'm delighted that Dr. Karina Croucher has agreed to be the discussant for the live session. Dr. Liv Nielsen Stutz of Linnaeus University, Sweden, has agreed to be the afterlife discussant. So that is going to be a real, I think, very exciting event, another first in a way, a conference dedicated to looking at digital mortuary archaeology as a public engagement mechanism, and critically reflecting on the public reception and consumption of mortuary archaeological research and ideas. Now, I want to do as a final reflection this month on my ongoing success on TikTok. This video in particular is a little challenging for me because I did videos on modern human ashes scattered in the landscape, and just said, if you're out in the landscape, do you realise if you met a dead body? And I use this as an example. This has gone, well, for me, viral. 2,745 likes and over 75,000 views at this point, and it's going on, it's trickling on. And it shows the power of TikTok in a way that my other social media can't have. Nothing else gets this coverage on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, and that's great, but also it comes with great power comes great responsibility. And with both these videos and my online materials, I'm not showing human remains on most of the time. I'm not dealing with the grisly. I'm not trying to I'm trying to be as responsible as possible in what I show. So actually, with that blog and another recent one, most of my my TikToks don't get that kind of attention. Here's one on Offa's Dyke that's done well, with 37 likes and almost 2,000 views, showing you a point where the Llangollen Canal intersects and cuts across the line of Offa's Dyke, and a lot of people like that. So I'm okay on this territory, but of course a lot of what I'm doing is to do with death, and that's the whole point of why I'm communicating. But I'm actually being very restrained in what I put online, and I want you to know that I'm not above criticism. I want to hear when you think I've got things wrong, but I'm working very hard not to make this a grisly, ghoulish channel with lots of gravestones. Yes, I've got some videos of gravestones on here, and memorials, and 10th century Viking crosses and gravestones and stuff. But I'm also trying to be responsible, and so that's a bit of hamstrung me, and particularly this year it's been a bit of a challenging year. There's been loved ones that have been lost, and I know a lot of people are in a similar situation for one reason or another, and I must say that it's been a challenging time also in terms of being aware of those sensitivities, and also trying to play with a video experiment with TikTok and YouTube as video channels. And I'm not sure I've got it right, but I'm trying to be restrained and do my best. And my final point, and I'll do a separate video about this at some point, is I have a brand new book out as of yesterday. Archaeo Press, I've published the 3rd in a row edited collection from the University of Chester student conferences. I was just telling you about the 6th one coming up. I'm working on the 5th volume, The Public Archaeology of Treasure, from a conference that happened at the beginning of the year, and I'm pleased and proud to say that Archaeo Press have again showed interest in publishing it. But I want to say that yesterday the 4th University of Chester Archaeology Student Conference proceedings was published edited by Kieran Gleave, one of my former students, Pauline Clark, who I mentioned as I interviewed for the YouTube channel, and myself. And it pulls together a really exciting range of papers, some of which were presented at the conference as keynotes or student talks, others which were specially commissioned. And it is again a first, and it links in, dovetails in with the Authors Night Collaboratory and my work looking at frontiers and borders, past and present. We have interviews with some expert archaeologists. We have some papers from superb new minds and new approaches. And this book is downloadable for free from the Archaeopress website. So I'll put the link in the descriptor below, and I will do a video about it in due course. But please go and read and with enthusiasm, looking at how archaeologies of frontiers and borderlands intersect with contemporary society, how they're received, and how we engage communities with sometimes sensitive, sometimes dark aspects of the human past, of division and violence, but also about community. So we can use these monuments to engage people in stories about past and reflections on their present and their future. Well, that does wrap it up. So thank you for watching. Keep subscribing to my YouTube channel. If you are already subscribing, whack on the subscribe button if you want to see more about the archaeologies of death and memory. And I will be back for more videos. Farewell for now.
Follow Archaeodeath on WordPress, or you'll never learn.